Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos Ribbits, not to be confused with Nick Hudson, because I'm a generation older, I'm a generation balder, but somehow I'm 3 generations more experienced. Well, thank you for coming back to Musical Talk. In this week's episode, we're going to hear the second part of that conversation with David Kingsmill about his relatively recent tour of London's West End musical theatre options to find some more of his pick of the many shows that he saw over the period of 2014 and 15. In today's episode, and in no particular order, we're going to be talking about Dogfight, Miss Saigon, Book of Mormon, Dickens Abridged, No Way to Treat a Lady, and those 2 musicals which will forever be linked, even though they technically have nothing to do with each other. That's Stephen Ward and From Here to Eternity. So, as they used to say, and I'm sorry I'll read that again, without further ado, and rather a lot of nothing, let's get on with the conversation. Here's David Kingsmill, talking about his stage odyssey. Musical Talk. Well, David, hello.
Hello.
For what I think is part 2 of your West End Odyssey.
Indeed, and part 4 of the David Odyssey of 2012, 13, 14 and 15, apparently.
Absolutely. It's, yes, very much in the style of David Bowie. It's a stage odyssey.
Yes, absolutely. It's a long way to Homer.
So just to recap, we're talking about a number of the shows which have jumped out of your memory from that period in 2013, but mostly 2014 when you were doing the West End a fair bit.
Absolutely.
So, we've tackled some like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and the Scottsboro Boys.
Yes.
So, which is a nice range. So,
it is indeed.
So let's see what variety we get today. So what are we going to kick off with this week?
I think what we're going to kick off with this time, why don't we start with a couple I think we're going to have some entertaining banter on, which was the 2 wonderful new musicals that opened up in early 2014 and closed in early 2014, which would be Stephen Ward and From Here to Eternity.
Yes, they came together and they left together almost.
They did pretty much. I'm not sure if it might have been just before 2014. I don't exactly remember the dates, but
it was actually they both started in autumn 2013.
Oh, my apologies. Well, I wasn't there. I wasn't here, so that's my excuse.
And they both folded in February, March.
They did, yes.
Which is very much the graveyard slot for theatre.
It does
shows.
seem
they
to be.
Go in that time.
Well, I rather feel like they probably get a glut around Christmas, and then, as with most things in this world, January is a complete flop.
Yeah, because no one spends money in January.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's quite.
So it's probably.
So which do you want to tackle first?
Oh, let's go for the one. Let's start with Stephen Ward, because I think I saw that first.
What did you think of Stephen Ward by Andrew Lloyd Webber?
I thought, to be perfectly blunt, I wondered what it was doing in the West End. No, that's perhaps a little harsh, but I must admit, for something that was... And I normally wouldn't sort of talk about something I don't think that I didn't think of... Well, I would want to think of something a little more highly before I started talking, but the fact that it was a new Andrew Lloyd Webber, I think, makes it talking material.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
And I really...
It's a proper West End debut and everything.
It was,
well,
and it was
him,
a big...
show,
and it was this big, high-profile thing, and I went to go and see it, and I couldn't tell you a single song from the show. I couldn't have hummed a single song. In fact, I think I went round to try and meet Alex Hansen, who was a wonderful actor and did stunning things in that show and still couldn't rescue it for me. But I've met him before, he's a lovely chap, and I wanted to go and say hello, and by the time I got to the stage door, I think I'd forgotten every song in it. And that was my biggest problem with it, was just, to me, extremely unmemorable.
And yet, you've never had it so good. So this is where you and I are utterly different, because I do remember the show, and it is my second favourite Andrew Lloyd Webber show.
Really? After what?
After Evita.
Oh, okay, yes.
And it is because... Actually, I don't much like... I like Andrew Lloyd Webber as a person. I don't much like Andrew Lloyd Webber's shows, for the most part. I mean, I'll sit through Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Doodah if necessary. We've all done it.
Yes.
Possibly far too many times.
I'm still in debate as to whether that was the first show I ever saw. It was that or Cats, as far as musicals go, and I'm not sure. But I remember enjoying it. But
so
yes.
Andrew Lloyd Webber is one of your ways in.
Absolutely. He was my way in. I think him and Gilbert and Sullivan. When
did they work together?
Well, yes, quite.
Phantom of the Opera.
Well, actually, Notes is quite GNS-ish in its own way.
I think there's a very good Gilbert Sullivan lurking inside Phantom of the Opera, just waiting to get out and save it. But there we are. And no one listens to me.
Okay, you and
do
I
they?
differ there because I also love Phantom of the Opera. Well,
Yeah.
not as much as I used to. But that's another story. Let's come back to political catastrophes. Read through that what you will. Fair enough. So you were saying, yes, second favourite show.
My second favourite, because I think it. What I like about it doesn't take itself awfully seriously.
That's true.
It was heightened all the way through, so it's already playing to my particular. I'm not keen on sentiment, and
No.
it's not a sentimental show at all.
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah, it's not really moving in any particular sense. And that underplays it a bit, but whereas Phantom of the Opera is supposed to be deeply emotional and lush, shall we say, this is not.
Fair
and yes,
enough.
I agree with you at one level. It did feel a little cheap for the West End. I think they made a great deal out of very little. I don't mean in the score. I do mean in the set design and the way they decided to stage it.
I think there were some great elements.
Almost black box in some cases.
Yeah, and actually I thought the staging was really interesting, precisely because it was Andrew Lloyd Webber, but it was on a comparatively small scale.
It was, but that's why I preferred that, because I didn't think it was being overblown, as
Right.
some of his shows are.
Oh,
Forgive me,
absolutely.
Love Never Dies and things like that. But
Goodness, yes.
But they made a virtue out of that. So one of the things I remember most about it, and to this day I still really like, there was various scenes, particularly in the nightclub, where, if you may remember, they had circular curtains
They did.
going around, and of course it was all about circles and
Yeah.
social circles. And
Yeah.
I thought the set underscored the context of the time and the story.
I think that's entirely just. I think massive kudos go to the set designer for the work. It was consistently inventive.
Yeah.
And actually, I think my two greatest memories of the show, possibly one of them slightly exacerbated by From Here to Eternity, which I'll sort of hint at now, which is the fact that it seems to be. I saw these 2 days in a row.
Yes.
I saw From Here to Eternity
I saw
the
them
day.
I saw them both in about 4 days.
Okay, well, I saw Stephen Moore on a Wednesday, and I saw From Here to Eternity the next day, and it seemed to me the time of full female nudity in shows.
Oh yes, you're
Because
right.
in
There was-
both of them, there was a fully nude girl at one point in time.
was she fully nude in From Here to Eternity? I seem to remember it was a Fleshing's suit.
It was no, she was just wearing the colonel's jacket.
Oh right.
Or whatever
I thought
rank
she
he
wearing
was,
a
the sergeant's
Fleshing
jacket.
undergarment, but there we
Well,
are.
possibly. I was far enough away that I couldn't tell.
I was close enough not to want to see. So.
Fair enough. Well, I sincerely hope she was, because we'll come on to this show in a minute, but one wrong move and you'd see everything. But I thought, that stood out just because it was a little bit shocking in something. And to be fair, if you look
still
back
is,
at the
yeah.
politics of it, then it absolutely was. Just because it was unexpected. Because it seemed, in many odd ways, and this almost goes against what I'm saying, but in many odd ways, it seemed like a show that was a lot about culture and these people who were involved in this very high-powered ring, and then suddenly and of course that's what it was. It was they were playing in the swimming pool, and she just suddenly ran out naked, not expecting everybody else to be right in front of them. It was quite a powerful little moment, and it said a lot about the way that people reacted in those times to something like that happening. And the other one was the very, very top and end of the show, where you saw Alex Hansen standing alone, frozen, amongst the waxworks.
I thought that was the weakest part of the show. It didn't need that framing device at all, I think.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
For me.
I think maybe it's. I question the framing device itself, but the image
Yes.
stuck with me.
Yes, I know why they did it. They did it because it's representative of the vilification he got at the hands of the establishment
Yeah.
when they decided to scapegoat him. I understood it. I just think that what it did, I thought it gave us a fairly lurching start into the show, I thought. And paid off at the end, perhaps. But I must also say that the song when he's in the waxworks, the opening number, is I think actually the stodgiest song in the whole piece. So actually,
That I won't disagree with. It really was. I think I was just left with that. There's something about just seeing a load of waxworks and then suddenly one of them comes to life and
Yeah.
there's Alex Hansen in front of you. And then
Yeah.
I like bookends, and I think this comes back to the last episode where we were talking about Merrily We Roll Along and the loss of the Hills of Tomorrow.
yes.
Even though I understand why it was taken out, I like bookends, and I feel like there was something about it where it was almost, dare I say, Jackanory-ish, where he sort of came out, began the story, and then at the very end the story's closed and he goes back to where he was again. And I thought that was a nice touch.
I understand. I just like to say I also like bookends usually, but I prefer books.
Touche. I think that's entirely fair, and I guess that's where you and I differed. I felt like the bookends were more interesting than the book itself, and I don't mean book as in musical theatre, but what was in the middle.
I'm not going to say for 1 second it's a flawless show. It is very far from being a
Oh,
flawless
heavens,
show.
yes.
It would have benefited, I think, from having gone on a national tour and then coming to London.
Yes, I absolutely
because some
agree.
of those edges would have been buffed up,
Yes,
polished.
and I think that's what it
but
really
it had
needed.
a sense of humour, and you don't often get that in a Lloyd Webber.
True. True, I will give it that. And there were definitely a couple of chuckles in it. And it wasn't the kind of show where I wasn't sitting in my seat fuming and steam coming out of my ears wondering what I just spent my money on. I just feel like for somebody with Lloyd Webber's pedigree, I was disappointed. But then I guess the thing is, from what you're saying, it also sounds like and this is something we haven't really discussed before, but it sounds like we come at Lloyd Webber from two different angles.
Oh, I think we do, yes.
Because I think I'm much more I like Phantom of the Opera. I do actually quite like Joseph in parts.
I'd love to see Joseph in parts.
Cats I can take or leave, but I think it sounds like the shows that we like are possibly a little bit different. So maybe that's where this stems from, is if you like a certain type of Lloyd Webber, and it seems to me like it's going to be the Evita side, the beautiful game side, the things that are a little bit less fantastical, then you're probably somebody who enjoyed Stephen Ward. Whereas I think if you liked...
Yeah.
I'm not saying I like the shows to be big and fantastical, I just think, to me, that's what he does well.
I'm going to be blunter than that. I think on the whole I don't much like Andrew Lloyd Webber, so when he's doing things where he's not really doing what he normally does, and I appreciate what he normally does is actually quite a wide range.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not going to damn him by saying he doesn't do much. He does an amazing amount. I mean, he's an amazing man, and he'll be remembered long after I am, so, and quite rightly so. So,
yeah.
I'm not in any way damning him, but this was an atypical Lloyd Webber show, and because of its atypicality, I think I liked it all the more. It was also...
Fine.
I'm also going to say, however, it's one of its... I know what it was doing, but it was also not just atypical, it was also atopical, and by which I mean...
That's very true.
Because the topicality of what was going on in 1963 has come and gone, I'm afraid. There was a film called Scandal, which came out in the 80s or 90s,
Yep.
which revisited the issue almost exactly the same way. And that's, if you like, the high point of retrospective interest. And I think that's also passed for 20 years. So it was difficult to work out why they decided that 1963 was the period they now needed to address.
Yeah.
When in fact, actually, much more topical at the moment is the re-evaluation of the Thatcher years of the 1980s. For
Absolutely.
example.
I mean, if Iron Lady suddenly became a musical, I think it would be something people would be a lot more aware of.
You might want to patent that idea. I think you may have just...
Yes, potentially. Oh, I've got too many projects.
I did actually see in Edinburgh last year, Margaret Thatcher...
Queen of Soho.
Absolutely.
I did not see that. I'm so annoyed.
Fantastic show that was.
That's one of my greatest regrets of that Edinburgh. I desperately wanted to see that. The
hoping-
reviews that were pouring out of it were amazing.
I'm hoping he's going to do it again. It was also hilarious.
Well, if
But there we
he
are.
does it again and I'm there, that's top of my list, I think.
But forgive me, if anyone is listening and wonder what that was like, just Google the poster.
Yes.
It's a picture of Margaret Thatcher with a feather boa.
Yeah, I
fantastic.
think it's perfectly, from what I've heard, it's perfectly representative.
So
The other thing is, there was another musical of this, wasn't there? Because somebody did Profumo, the musical, I
They
believe.
did indeed. When I discussed this with Tim Saywood, another alumni of Musical Talk, I think he was able to identify a third musical again.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, okay, that's
I mean,
news to me.
The popular view is this is still the most successful Stephen Ward.
Right. Wow.
But the question is... Yeah, I think Stephen Ward. I've said it before on Musical Talk. I'll say it again. If you're an amateur group with a bit of ambition, do Stephen Ward. It will be a great amateur show.
I think that's the thing. I think perhaps what I was really let down by was the fact that it was a West End production that didn't feel like one.
Yeah.
And I think, yes, maybe you're right. Maybe an amateur or like a high-end amateur who can pull off the politics of it without coming across as dull.
Yeah.
Then I think, yes, you could absolutely do this. One other thing I have to mention is there was a wonderful piece of foreshadowing for this that was absolutely not foreshadowing at all. In that when Humphrey Lyttelton was still with us, there was an episode of I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue, where, for those who don't know, is a Radio 4 the antidote to panel games, they call it. It's very
It's a
apt.
send-up of
Yeah,
card
and one
games.
of the games that they play in that is one song to the tune of another, which does exactly what it says on the tin. But in order to dumb it down for the audience, Humphrey goes into these ridiculously complicated explanations of how it's like a jam roly-poly, and the lyrics are the jam and the music is the sponge. But there's one he did where he was talking about lyricists, which was a slightly different game, and he said the people that everybody always forgets about are the lyricists. After all, where would Rogers have been without Hammersmith?
Yes.
And what about Andrew Lloyd Webber? Who would have heard of him without Mandy Rice Davies?
Oh, I see.
And this was about 20 years ago. So there's a wonderful bit of foreshadowing to Stephen Ward in that, which just tickled me when I suddenly realised that's what had happened.
Well, you said the magic word rice, of course, which I appreciate comes out of a joke.
Absolutely, aiming for Tim Rice, naturally.
Who, of course, was also represented in London at the same time.
Would you believe that was a segue? Actually, it wasn't intended as one, but hey, I win.
Perfect.
Yes, which would have been From Here to Eternity.
What did you think?
This, I have a funny feeling we're going to disagree again, because this I thought much more of than I did of Stephen Ward.
I thought it was much more on, by which I mean it felt much more moronic.
Right.
I detested it.
Okay.
Whereas I was happy to give Stephen Ward the benefit of the doubt and mark it up. This just felt, this will do at every level. But tell me why you liked it.
Well, I think what it really felt like to me was a musical that needed one more week of workshop. I felt like there were so many elements of it that were almost there and just not quite. And I feel, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like it gave me the sensation that it was rushed onto stage a little bit.
Yes, actually, I think that's a fair comment.
What did I like about it? I thought the subject matter was interesting. I thought the way they tackled it was very interesting. And there were more songs in it. I'm still not 100% sure I could sing anything from it. I certainly could for 2 or 3 days. Maybe after that it had drifted off into nowhere. But there were more songs in that stood out to me as being... There's the one that's repeated the whole way through the show, which was the sort of anthem of the soldiers.
Is this the Boys of Company B or whatever?
Yes.
Company G, I think.
Which, whilst I think perhaps there came a point where they killed the horse, then carried on flogging it. But it did... It made its point, and I think actually there's something about that song.
They shoot the horse in slow motion and then make him sing a song before he finally carved it.
Very possibly. It certainly would have fitted in.
Yes,
but
well, it did happen, didn't it?
It did. I enjoyed it. I thought that was a song that kind of it set the show in its time, and it made it quite a powerful statement as well. They also had and maybe I must admit I have a soft spot for this. They had a marvellous blues duet between the sergeant and. Oh goodness, I can't remember characters right at this point. But it was the two gents, I think it was at the top of Act 2 somewhere, and it was just the two of them on a beach, one of them with a guitar, and they just did this fantastic blues duet that stuck with me.
Was it a comedy blues? Because there was a kind of...
Was it comedy?
There was an amusing blues, which I actually thought was the best song in it as well, if we're talking about the same one, except it was I can't remember the title of it, but it wasn't two of them, so it might well have been.
I think it probably was that, and it was just...
I thought it was a moment of light relief. So.
Yes, absolutely, and I think it one of the things that I think that musical did that Stephen Ward didn't do for me was there were moments in it that I felt it earned, and I feel like Stephen Ward, there wasn't so much earning going on. There was a little more shoehorning.
Stephen Ward was more of a cartoon anyway, I think.
I think it was, and possibly
performances and smoother edges. It wasn't real history in some sense.
No, and it's possible that I'm looking at it through the wrong lens, and maybe that's why I've got that jarred view of it. But
But I'm interested to think that you think the score was better in From Here to Eternity.
It was more memorable. I think it felt more complete in a way. Like Stephen Ward to me felt like there was I don't know what it was. Was it instrumentation? Was it more chorus work? Was it something? I always got the sense something was missing. And I'm not quite... I couldn't put my finger on it if I tried, but something in there. Whereas
the contrast, can I say, by the way, I thought the score was better in Stephen Ward, and I thought the lyrics were better from Here to Eternity. And I've said this before, if only we could persuade Tim Rice and Andrew Lloyd Webber to work together, they might make some kind of partnership.
I think that's absolutely true. And you're absolutely right about the lyrics. I thought From Here to Eternity's lyrics actually... that sold the show, because I think there was a lot of poignancy, there was a lot of... emotion, I suppose, in it, really, which didn't necessarily get carried by the score. And I think maybe that's one of the things I was saying, it feels a little bit like it needs one more workshop.
I thought the book was jumbled in From Here to Eternity as well. I mean, once again, I must tell you that somehow or other I managed to go on the night when all the understudies were on again.
You did not have much luck with this, did you?
I love Ryan Sampson. I think he's a hilarious actor. He was supposed to be the Maggio character, who's the one who unfortunately is murdered in prison, and turns out to sort of at least be bisexual. But there's a lot of interesting stuff going on with him. I think he's by far the much more interesting character than any of the others. And the actor who did it was fine. His diction wasn't brilliant. He was still the best character in the piece, but I didn't get to see the one advertised who'd be getting all the good reviews.
Right.
But the central character, whose name I can't remember, but P, I think, that he was a boxer.
Yes.
But he wouldn't box, and there was a reason he wouldn't box, but it was never properly explored or revealed.
No, there were definitely a few plot holes.
There was a lot of things he wouldn't have a girlfriend or have a relationship. So but they never quite unwrapped why.
I think that's absolutely justified criticism.
And then the Rebecca Thornhill character, who's the one wearing the captain's jacket and may or may not have been wearing fleshings underneath. The first time she meets the handsome hero, the Darius character, they're very snippy with each other, and then the second time she just goes round to his house and basically they shag almost immediately. And you think,
yeah.
oh, come on, please, there must be an extra scene to make this work. So I thought because the plot didn't quite cohere, because it was trying to do too much, too quickly, they sketched in the character developments, particularly the serious, the ones that needed. I mean, the villainous captain of the platoon or whatever it was a villainous captain, but it was very little. I mean, we gather he's impotent, but that's not necessarily enough to explain why he's such a rotter.
It felt like
none of the characters looked painted properly.
It did feel to a certain extent like a show of tropes.
Yeah.
And all you got was the trope. You didn't get the flesh and bones to cover it, which I think is... I entirely understand that. I don't know what it... I mean, to this day, I'm not even sure I can put my finger on precisely what it was that made me think it was a better show.
Can I just also mention the set design? We mentioned the set design and how it was cheap but trying to be resonant in Stephen Ward. I thought the set design here was a lot more interesting, and then occasionally let itself down with being massively clumsy. There was a lovely... I don't know if you remember this, but there was a kind of sort of broken stage. So they laid a full stage on the real stage. So you've got... And it looked like it'd been bombed.
Yes.
Later on it is, of course. And so there were sort of splintered and broken planks leading out over the pit. There was a kind of sort of damaged stonework walls that had been painted along the wall. So that all looked very effective. You know, some thought and cleverness had gone into it. But then there was this very clumsy sort of flanged thing at the back, which went up for them to be a rock to lean on.
Yeah.
And then went down again. And one of the actors has to have a jolly good spit there. And then later on, we see the famous scene where... the boxer and the no, it's not the boxer. The handsome captain and the commander's wife doing the From Here to Eternity thing on the beach.
Yeah.
And all I can think is, they're lying on the spit. So there were a couple of moments, and I thought, oh come on, someone should have at least raked over the coals.
That's fair, and I think there's one other major problem that this musical does run into, and that's the fact that it is. With all the subtlety of a battleship, it's taking on South Pacific.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And there is no way to get over that. And whatever you think about Rodgers and Hammerstein, there's no way to get around the fact that South Pacific is a better designed musical.
Yeah.
And
was first.
And was first, yes. Now, I appreciate they're telling a slightly different story here, but there are so many corollaries of moments in each show that I think it's difficult to get past that. And that was my biggest thing, was I was watching it, and actually some of the set design even, you can't escape the fact that you have to go orange for sunsets and things like that. But I saw, and I think we talked about some time ago, South Pacific when it was on in London. And
a couple of years ago, wasn't it?
It was about 3 or 4, I think, because it was before I went back to Canada. And in fact, I know exactly when it was, because I went for my birthday in 2012. So it was August 2012. And I kept seeing sets from that, not mirrored exactly, but referenced in From Here to Eternity. And I guess to a certain extent, if you're setting something in the location, in the time period, it's going to look a bit the same because it has to. And I think that works against it slightly, because all of a sudden you're comparing it against something that was written by, dare I say it, a superior writing duo.
Fair enough. You prefer the score, didn't you? I think so.
Of
From Here to Eternity, as well as the lyrics. So for you, it's a stronger.
To Stephen Ward, yes, but no. But I'm now talking about Rodgers and Hammerstein and South Pacific.
Even I, who don't like Rodgers and Hammerstein, would.
I mean, you can't hold From Here to Eternity up to those two. I think they are just better, and therefore they wrote a better show. But then they also had, I suppose, did they have more experience? Yes, I suppose they did. I'm not sure. Can't remember where in their career it was written, but there's certainly a more.
But just to close us on From Here to Eternity, then, I mean, I don't like it, and I've been pretty plain white. Why did you like it? To persuade someone, to persuade me, why? Why should I see it again if it were on?
Well, for a start, I did really enjoy the energy that they put into it. I mean, songs like The Boys of Company B, it was difficult not to get carried along with, because it was so enthusiastic. They had some very good choreography in that show. Actually, I seem to recall quite a lot of movements of beds and things like that when they were sort of setting up the dormitory, and they're setting this dormitory up whilst doing all this, introducing the characters, making them, these are fit soldiers, and they use that song to say, hey, look, we're fit men, we're doing acrobatics or we're doing strength work. They have the boxer up front who's kind of punching, but he doesn't really box, so he's not. And there's quite a lot of motion going on. So very, very energetic show, which I felt contrasted with. If we're talking about contrast, which I suppose we're not, but that's another thing that contrasted for Stephen Ward for me, was I felt Stephen Ward was quite slow. I felt the score was quite strong. I really liked. I thought it was catchy. I felt I came out humming a couple of songs. I feel like if they brought the same show back and put it on now, it would have learned from its mistakes.
So it also needed a national tour.
I think
Fun
so.
enough.
I actually think so, and I think giving it that little bit of a leg up, of having a little bit more
Most of a leg
feedback.
over, which seemed to be all they wanted to do.
Well, that's true. And actually, to be fair, one thing we didn't mention was the scene in the bar that has the fight after it, which I thought was, that was possibly the strongest moment in the show for me.
Yeah, but I tell you what that did. I thought that finally destroyed any sympathy I might have had for the platoon of soldiers, because they might have been fit in the sense of acting, but my God, they were prejudiced. They were badly disciplined. I know they were of their time.
Yes,
but they were really. They were not an elite fighting force.
No, there was no holding back in that scene whatsoever, and I think that possibly either made the show or broke it for some people. I felt like it was a really strong moment. It was very powerful. If you looked at it as an of their time thing, then I think it actually, like, all of a sudden they gained a lot more character that they didn't have previously. It wasn't necessarily good. In fact, it wasn't good. And then you had the fight straight afterwards outside in the streets, and I just thought that little sequence was really strong. And it was just, I guess I just had more memorable moments from it. I'm not by any means saying it was my favourite musical. I would, I'd probably give it a generous 6 out of 10. But from what we're discussing, I felt like it was just the better show for me.
No, that's fair. I mean, forgive me, because they came and went at the same time, they're always going to be yoked together, particularly when we bear in mind the two big names attached to both the shows. So,
absolutely.
And you pay your money and you take your choice.
And yeah, totally. And they were gambles, and to be fair, they both paid off in their own ways. I think the lessons that were learned were not necessarily, how to write a successful musical.
Now, it does, however, raise a very interesting thing, which is actually in 2014, the British West End was invaded by all branches of the American Armed Forces, as far as I can see. Because after that, we also have Miss Saigon, which you saw.
I did.
Revived, and Dogfight.
Yes, absolutely.
And you saw both of those, so which of those would you like to talk about next? So we'll keep the Stars and Stripes flying in the background.
Yes, absolutely. Well, let's slide into Miss Saigon. Because this...
I'm sorry, put it that
way. Let's start with Miss Saigon. This one was interesting for me because this was a show I did actually see when it first came out.
You saw the original?
I saw the original. Well, not when it first came out, obviously.
But the original run.
I did. Well, Nick Greenshields, who's a name that may or may not be known to people. You'd certainly know him if you knew him. He's about 6'8". But I worked with him back at the Kenneth More Theatre in Ilford, and this was his first West End role. He was a GI in that, and being something of the excitable, I've worked with you, and he was a friend. I went along to go and see it, actually, partly because he was in it. But I ended up seeing, what was a fantastic show. I don't remember too much about it. I think I was 16 at this point, something like that. But it was very interesting to then come back and say, okay, let's have another go and see what they've done with this revival. And
so let me ask you, okay then, what have they done with this revival?
Well, what fascinated me was I didn't feel like it moved on much.
Was it just a revamp of the 80s show? Or the 90s show, rather?
From what I remember, and that's the overarching caveat of everything I say if I compare the two shows, yes. It struck all the same beats. You've still got your awesome helicopter scene, which I'm inclined to say was more impressive this time around because technology has moved on. One would expect that. But
on the other hand, there's no surprise now, is there?
No, absolutely not. And the wonder of it has been somewhat diminished by, the fact that it's not a new thing anymore.
No, I've seen a multicoloured bus in the West End stage with Priscilla, Queen of the Desert.
Quite so.
Helicopters.
Yeah, quite. And the fact that, you can say to somebody, well, this is live theatre, sometimes the helicopter doesn't land, and they know what you're referring to. It takes away from it. That said, I thought the way they used the lighting and the effects, and they sort of had rushing wind through the auditorium, and it was a very powerful moment, but I just kind of felt like the whole show was technologically a bit more complicated because time has moved on, however long, I don't know, when would it, I suppose 15 years, say.
If you're not talking about Madame Butterfly, yes.
Well, quite, yes. If you're talking about that, that's a whole other story. But the show didn't much. Now, what I will say is there were some standout performances in it. The chap playing the engineer, my God, is worth seeing the show just for him. He was so good. And there were a couple of other fantastic performers within it. I was... Okay, no, I'm going to be brutally honest at this point. I was a little unfortunate, I thought, in the fact that I saw the understudy playing John. who I have to say is probably the first time I've actually seen an understudy who I haven't been particularly impressed by.
Well, you must come to the theatre with me then.
Oh, fair enough, yes. It sounds like I've had a better time of it with them. But I find often that understudies have a lot to prove, and I'm kind
Of course, yeah.
I find myself wondering what...
Can I just say, by the way, just briefly, I don't have anything down on understudies. I saw the understudy in Top Hat a couple of years ago, and he was fantastic.
I think I may have seen... No, I didn't see... I think I saw an understudy in Singing in the Rain, who was also fantastic. And this is the thing, understudies a lot... Rowan Atkinson, I think I've said this before, is famous. He had some time off from Oliver, and he was quite famous for saying he had to get back on stage because his understudy was too good. And
I can take you back several decades on that, because Groucho Marx was ill in a very early stage show he did in the 20s, and Zeppo, the younger brother, looked very much like Groucho if you put the grease paste moustache on it. So
oh, really?
He acted up and the understudy went into Zeppo's role, and apparently Groucho said, I had to hurry back. I think he had laryngitis and had to have his tonsils out, or tonsillitis, something like that. Oof. But he said, I had to hurry back as soon as I could because Zeppo was getting better last than I was. So that's an old problem.
I have a funny feeling we had that exact conversation in the quiz episode, I'm not sure. But anyway, yes, it's... Or not with that detail, I might add. So I didn't realise it was actually Zeppo who'd come in. I need to brush up on my Marx Brothers, but that's another story. But there were two things I felt here, and one is a production team decision, and one was the actor. And it's possible. I think I saw it quite early in the run, and it's possible he just hadn't got into his stride yet. But it may have been. The other thing was a production decision, and this I'm hoping was a necessity of the score, which is that the understudy John can't play the saxophone. Or presumably can't play the saxophone because he didn't. And there's the scene at the beginning of the show where he plays the solo saxophone tune before it's been heard, sitting off to one side of the stage, and he has this beautiful old vintage tenor. And I'm assuming that the original John plays it because I've had people tell me that he does. But when I heard it, it was an alto saxophone in the pit that was playing the music. So
the man's playing a tenor on the stage.
Now, to be fair, I'm being picky here because I'm a musician, and B, more specifically, I'm a saxophonist. And a lot of people might not know the difference, but it really jarred with me, and I have to admit that because that's right at the top of the show, and the whole way through Act 1 this was bugging me, because it's one of those things that as an MD, now what I'm really, really hoping, and I'm pretty sure that this is probably the case, is that the reed player at the time was playing an alto saxophone and there was just no chance of swapping to a tenor before he had to then produce that solo.
You're hoping it's a necessity rather than a decision? Yes.
Absolutely, because if that was a decision, I'm very confused by it. But really, having said that, I feel like I've been quite damning to everything except the engineer at this point, and that's not really fair because it's a fantastic show, especially if you haven't seen the original Miss Saigon. It's very powerful. The story in this is very affecting. I would say in many ways it's almost as affecting as the Scottsboro Boys. I just happen to personally think the Scottsboro Boys is better delivered. But the meaning and the honesty behind it is really strong, and it was just unfortunate, I think, that perhaps I felt a little underwhelmed because I didn't really feel like it was doing anything new.
Now, I'm going to ask you a question on this. I've not seen Miss Saigon at all. It's
right.
Not something I'm interested in. I was never interested in Madame Butterfly either. So
fair enough.
Sorry, Puccini. But if he's listening, but you did see it when you were younger, and so you came back to it, and you've been able to make a judgment as far as you're able to say that you think it feels like the original production just heated up rather than rethought.
Yeah.
But you liked it. You think the show was worthwhile, deserved to be revived.
Absolutely.
Whereas you may or may not know that we've had two much younger reviewers who didn't see the show when it was around for the first time because they were far too young. That's Aiton and Louis, who really weren't taken by it. They went because it had such a good reputation. They went to see the revival, and they were both very, very disappointed, and have said so. And I wonder if it's because... Is it because it was so well received at the time that anyone who has a memory of that is being forgiving to it because it's a show of the 90s? When in fact, actually, if you come to it fresh here in the 21st century and you don't have that back knowledge of it, and it's just a legendary show that you know nothing about but you want to go and see because it's a legendary show, would it collapse? Also, and the other thing that I'd like to tie it in here, it's been revamped into the Vietnam War from the original Madame Butterfly. But the Vietnam War is not that far off Stephen Ward in terms of time, so we're talking 50 years ago. So the resonances for a certain generation about what happened in the 60s simply don't hold to people who were born in the 90s. So I'm wondering,
That's-
but that's only, I'm just trying to piece together the evidence I've been given by various different people. You liked it, but you've seen it. They
Yeah.
didn't like it, they hadn't seen it. And forgive me, you're young, but they're younger yet.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Now, what I will say is it's not my favourite show.
No.
I don't have the soundtrack, and I'm not particularly fussed about owning the soundtrack. There's a couple of songs in it that I enjoy, and I mean, Bui Doi is stunning, and I think that goes without saying, really. But possibly, I think would be the answer to the question. I
don't have an answer either.
No, well, I have
Just
seen
wondering.
it, and maybe what it is that because I was seeing something I was familiar with, yes, maybe I am more forgiving on it. I mean, I was damning the production for being non-innovative,
you
much
like the
more than
story.
I was concentrating, perhaps, on the depth of the story, because I suppose really the fact that it hasn't been updated means that it's a product of its original time rather
Yeah.
than being something contemporary. And the new Les Miserables,
Like if you go and see Phantom of the Opera, you're still seeing the 87 show, really.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, to a certain extent, I think that show is so iconic. There's not much you can do with it, and because it's been
All right, moving on.
well,
Yes,
in
there
the
is,
sense
but
of
yes, I know
there's
what you
plenty
mean,
you can
yeah,
do,
right.
but it's stuck into the public's imagination as being what it is.
It's exactly what happened with Gilbert and Sullivan. Gilbert and Sullivan had to be produced the same way for the first 60-odd years of the 20th century.
Right.
Exactly for that. And
But well, what Miss Saigon had was it had the advantage of the fact that it came off,
yes.
which Phantom hasn't done. It's been running now. How old am I? I'm going to be 30. Okay, so it's been running now for almost 29 years, and it's not changed in that time.
No.
Which means, I guess, that it hasn't been able. Now, that's why I think that actually Macintosh was quite brave in reinventing Les Miserables. Now, admittedly, that's been off on Broadway for I think about 7 years or something like that. But it gave them a chance to re-establish the show into a new, more contemporary medium. He's using, as I mentioned in the podcasts when we were talking about my New York shows, he uses moving projected backdrops to actually add to the feeling of London. He's readapted the staging. He's actually not got the revolve anymore, so he's forced himself to work with a different medium. And what he's done there is he's taken the old show. I can't remember right off the top of my head how much he messed with the orchestration. I don't think that much. But he's rebuilt it from the ground up to be something different. Now, Miss Saigon, you had the same opportunity there because it was taken off.
Yes.
And it's the fact that they didn't do that. And therefore, I think, whilst your Les Mis in London at any rate, and your Phantom, they haven't had the chance to be forgotten. Well, they wouldn't be forgotten, but
Yeah.
they haven't had an opportunity yet to take a break and reinvent.
Yeah.
So they can't reinvent to a point because they're stuck in the public
Because they're
imagination.
still advertised as the original and best. Aren't
Exactly.
They? And that is their unique selling point at the moment.
And I think there perhaps lies the answer to your question, is maybe it's not appealing because, yes, there's some modern technology in use, and yes, perhaps the dance moves have been updated. I'm all of this is in the haze of me having seen this 15 years ago with about 200 shows in between.
Yes.
But I think it's probably, even though it's a contemporary show that was released in 2014, it's a product of the early 90s.
It's 1992 or whatever it is.
Yeah, and that I think is the problem.
And this takes us back to the conversation we had last week, which is about the West End in these economic times and the new shows not being successful,
Yes.
moving back to its comfort zone. And in this case, it's gone exactly back to its comfort zone. It's gone to the biggest show of the 90s
Yep.
and just put it back on again. It hasn't really even reimagined it.
No, not really.
Which is fine for those return viewers, but I suspect it's going to alienate younger people who are coming in, and or at least in the case of Louis and Aidan, that's exactly what has happened.
Well, it's possible, and I think the other thing is that the young people of today are perhaps slightly, where we were talking, as you say last time, about the concept of people not willing to take a risk on something new. That's because they've already developed an established history. Whereas I think, where the younger generation suffers a little bit in that sense is they don't have that established history yet. They might
It means
have.
they aren't tracked by it as well.
I mean, if
though.
they're super musical theatre oriented family, then maybe they've got 10 years of living memory, from when they were 8, 9, 10, that they can carry forward and then run with that. But those who were introduced, like I didn't really get into musical theatre big time until I was about 14, and so therefore, if I were seeing this show age 20, I'd have, you can't afford to see shows all the time. I might have seen a dozen. And therefore, you're still learning your likes and your dislikes and what to expect. And bringing something back that is sat in the past, as far as I'm concerned, at any rate, you're trying to bring something to an audience that has moved past that.
Yes, I agree with that.
So the stage effects, yes, the helicopter isn't shocking. It is impressive. There's no getting past that. I think that scene
But
is
it
actually
isn't
quite
new.
impressive. But it's not new.
Yeah.
And you could go to one of 3 or 4 other shows and be more impressed, potentially, by what happens there than you are by this, what was a standout moment of theatre when it first came in.
Well, here's a question, and I'm just trying to think of a show that's you're younger than I am, but you're older than they are. So I'm going to try and find a show from, say, the 70s or 80s, which was legendary. But would we go and see it if they advertised it as being a reversion, i.e., the original version put on today? So if someone said to me, "Would you be interested in going to see the original Evita if they put it back on stage?" Well, maybe Evita is... I don't know.
You see, the political part of me would hold my hand up and say, yep, I'll go see that.
But if it was all the stagecraft of the 1970s rather than now...
I'd be inclined to say probably not.
Exactly, and that's exactly what I think we've got here.
I think, you could probably ask the same question of Hair. And in actual fact, I know multiple people who walked out of Hair when it was back in, 2010?
Yes.
Something like that. I know many people who didn't come back at the interval because it did nothing for them in any way, shape or form. Now that, in some ways, where the helicopter was shocking, the whole concept of Hair is meant to be shocking, and I just don't think it really is. The message is important, but I think the concept has moved beyond the shock and awe of, when you look at, we were just giggling before we started recording this episode about 50 Shades of Grey, which is the current shock.
But it won't last, will it?
No, absolutely not. Well, and the other thing is that it's already happening. It's been out in the theatres, I think, for about 3 days, and already things are appearing all over Facebook saying how wrong. And I believe, I haven't really read into it yet, because, quite frankly, I don't care, how dangerous some of the representations of bondage are. So they've actually, now, this is the thing. Hair, from my understanding, they actually got a lot of that representation pretty right. And it's still lost traction as time has gone on. So I feel like it's one of those shows where Miss Saigon has an important message to tell, and I think it falls into the Hair category of, I think the representation is probably pretty fair. I wasn't there. I can only speak from what I've studied, and I'm military history. I kind of World War II rather than Vietnam, but I feel like it's a fairly accurate representation, and I feel like it's still lost traction. So, great shame that they didn't do something a little bit more avant-garde with it and take it somewhere that it hasn't been already.
So, although you enjoyed it, we'd say probably it's more of a Miss Saigon than a hit Saigon.
Yes, absolutely. And you see, hey, look, I'm on a Segway fight today. We could compare that to the very avant-garde and very forward-thinking Dogfight, which you've already mentioned.
I think we have to.
Which I went to see at the Southwark Playhouse when it was on. And
can I just say briefly, I know a number of people who went to see it, and I haven't yet heard one negative comment about it.
No, you're not going to get one from me either. I walked out, I sort of, the beginning of the interval, I think I had my jaw hanging open. It was just such an in-your-face, powerful production of this. Now I'm going to smack on something that Miss Saigon missed on for me with the new production, which Dogfight's choreography was out of this world good. I thought that, in fact, everything about the show, I really don't have a bad thing to say about it. Possibly the only thing is that on one viewing, I'm not still humming melodies.
Yes.
It was a little... It wasn't inaccessible. That's entirely the wrong word. It's a very accessible score, but it's perhaps a little bit complex. Now, I mean, something like Scottsboro Boys, I had the advantage of the fact that I've been listening to the score for 2.5 years. But I think it would have been very difficult to come out of a show like that not humming the tunes, because the way that they repeat, the way that they were structured was induced a memory of them, which I feel Dogfight, you need to study a little bit to really get that induction of...
I would have thought, and I haven't seen the Scottsboro Boys at this stage, but one presumes because it owes so much to the minstrelsy tradition, or at least uses that for its context and advantage, it presumably has a certain jauntiness to it.
It does,
and
absolutely.
jauntiness catches, whereas, forgive me, more sophisticated scores, and I'm using that wrongly, but you know what I mean.
Yes.
That shows which more overtly say, look, I'm sophisticated, look how complex and fiddly I am, aren't necessarily going home whistly kind of songs.
No, and I mean, to be fair, it's very difficult to... Well, actually, no, I was about to say it's difficult to hum a lot of Sondheim, but I actually think there's quite a lot of Sondheim that it's quite easy to...
Yeah, so do
but
I
think he's an
that's one of those big
exception
myths.
that proves the rule in many ways.
And also we've had... 40, 50 years to get used to him. So
This is also true. I feel like Dogfight. This is the thing. It's one of the things that I know I'm never going to do because I'm not that kind of person. But what I think the writers of Dogfight have done is they've pushed the boundaries of what musical theatre is at the moment a little bit.
Oh, right.
And I think that's a wonderful thing to do, but I think that automatically makes your show something that needs a little bit more effort to get into the head.
yeah.
I mean, it is also very evocative of its time, which I think is also a great strength in that show, is the fact that you do, the costumes, the choreography is modern, but it is... And actually, I keep doing this. I keep bringing up the Scottsboro Boys, but I think it's one thing that they both did extremely well, and I think it's a very telling thing in modern choreography, is they harked back to a previous style of choreography. In Dogfight, we're looking specifically to the time. In Scottsboro Boys, we're looking specifically to, well, obviously you wouldn't have choreographed people in those times, but the Bob Fosse of Kander and
Yeah.
Ebb, so we're looking very much at the person. And then they've contemporized that and made it accessible and recognisable as something that is modern. And I think Dogfight's, let's bring back this diner atmosphere, let's bring back the locker room of the boys discussing what they're going to do, let's bring back this nightclub where this, to be quite frank, rather repulsive dogfight of the dogfight, for anybody who didn't see the show or isn't aware, is this idea of the boys take bets on who's going to be able to bring the ugliest girl to the dance. And this romance flowers out of this with this guy who picks what is, I suppose for the time, was probably the conventionally ugly thing, which is to say she was bigger than normal, she didn't conform to the wartime slim figure.
So she's no Betty Grable or whoever the pin-up of the particular war is in Dogfight?
No, she's not. But what comes out of it is actually this very heartfelt little story, and it's an absolutely beautiful show, and you have these really tense moments where the boys are arguing over what they're doing, or there's a moment, spoiler alert, incidentally, there's a moment where one of the girls lets slip to this girl what the dogfight is, because she doesn't actually know. Like, one of them's basically hired a prostitute because he couldn't pick up an ugly girl, and so she lets, in a fit of pique, she lets slip what the dogfight is to this bigger girl. Names are all currently escaping me, and there's this horrible meltdown moment, which I think is the end of Act 1, if memory serves.
It sounds very much like Boy Meets Girl. Boy loses girl. One finds out whether or not boy gets girl back again.
Pretty much.
Yes.
Well, I mean, if you...
Can I also say, it's actually got the touch of a fairy tale about it, although it's all
It
dressed
does a
up
little
in the
bit.
grittiness. There is actually, you can't judge a book by its cover, and look, here's... it's the old Miss Jones without your glasses, you're beautiful kind of thing. It turns out that beauty isn't about physicality, although that can help. It's in fact about something more... but that's very much the basics of Beauty and the Beast and the Frog Prince and all these kinds of things.
It's absolutely true, and I think there's a lot of that in it. There's a fascinating book, which, I mean, I'd recommend to anybody, but it's very heavy reading, called The 7 Basic Plots, by a chap called Christopher Brooker.
Someone's finally written them down, have they? Yeah.
I think this has been around for a decade or so, but essentially it says that all stories can be broken down into 7 basic plots, and it's things like rags to riches. I think The Journey is one. Comedy and tragedy in their original definitions. Things like that. There are a few that break the mould, like mystery stories, but they have elements of them in them. And then you have something like The Lord of the Rings, which is one of the novels out there that combines all 7 of them into one great big thing. Overcoming the Monster, that's another one. So I suppose there's bits and pieces of all of that. And, yes, this show does have tropes from these 7 basic plots in there. But it's, of course, they're simply the skeleton that holds everything together. And what goes on top of that can come out as a myriad of different things, and I think that it's been wildly successful in this case. And really, it left myself, and I saw this with Kieran Walsh actually, who people might remember from
Circle
Line in Edinburgh, who I spoke to a while ago, and both of us came out of that. I mean, he already knew the music well. I think he'd done what I did with the Scottsboro Boys and had been listening to the album for some time, but we both came out completely blown away by the show, so extremely successful and thoroughly enjoyable.
So that's the American invasion of the West End.
Indeed, yes. Well, actually, no, we're going to go for one more.
Oh, are we now?
Yes, we are, which is, I will talk about very briefly, because I suspect what isn't known about this musical at some point in time could be written down on a bit of fuse wire. But I did see the Book of Mormon.
All right, so these are not so much soldiers as God soldiers.
Yes, very, very much. The soldiers of the... No, was it?
Missionaries.
The soldiers of the army of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I believe is the way that one of the songs puts it.
Oh, really? I was going to say that sounds like the... what's that childhood rhyme? It's the Court of King Caractacus.
Oh,
It's-
you lost me there.
Oh,
That's a new one on me.
The fascinating witches who put stitches on the breeches of the note. It's one of those. you
Right,
know,
got
on
it,
the,
yeah.
The powder on the noses of the ladies in the Quarter King Caractacus.
Yes,
There we are.
okay, fair enough.
It just, the rhythm of it has that kind of, actually, funny enough, we're back to Gilbert again.
Yeah, funny thing.
Yeah, we always are.
Yeah, absolutely. Nothing wrong with that.
If you want a tripping lyric, then Gilbert's your starting point.
Absolutely.
So-
Absolutely.
As you say, we discussed Book of Mormon on Musical Talk several times, but what's your take?
I think this is one of those shows that it's written by, you bring the name Trey Parker into it. You mentioned South Park. People who don't know South Park are in for a bit of a shock, and
Yes.
people that know what kind of humour he writes know pretty much what to expect. It's about...
Can I just say, by the way, South Park the Musical is, in my view, the best musical film of its decade.
I haven't seen it. I must admit, South Park... Now, this is one of those things. South Park, I don't particularly like. Book of Mormon, I just roared with laughter the whole way through it. I really... And I know there are some people who find it very offensive, and to be fair... I'm not sure it skirts the line so much as it does stand on the edge pointing and laughing.
Yes, I'm sure it does.
It's a very, very close to the bone show. And it will punch you in the face if you're not ready for it. But I think what it does is it does it with extremely well-crafted music songs, and the book isn't half bad either. Now, again, this is something I had the score of for quite... the cast recording of for quite some time. Before I heard it, I knew exactly what to expect. There's about 2 songs in it I didn't like. This is one of those rare occasions where I still don't like either of them, despite having seen it. But that's just purely based off my musical taste. And it's my only problem with it is the price of the tickets. I think the cheapest seat for that's something like £90 if you buy them at full price. But it's a great show. It really, really is. And if you can get into it, but better yet, if you succeed in the lottery, which I'm aware is one of the hardest things you can possibly do, because I think there's only 20 day seats that are available, and I think usually there's about 100 people.
Sorry, this is a lottery for getting tickets on the day.
Oh, yes, I beg your
right,
pardon.
sorry.
Yes, you probably should declare it. Yes, if you succeed at the actual lottery, then you're kind of taken care
Yes.
of.
Yeah, you can buy the cast and they'll do it in your living room.
No, this is one of the rare occasions where the American concept of doing a lottery for day seats has come in rather than just rushing them. So I think there's about 100 people out there as a general rule, 2 hours before the show begins, going for 20 seats, and I believe each person is allowed to take 2. So,
Yes.
Double the odds on that, which is a little bit difficult. But if you succeed on that, I think the seats are £30 or something, so you've suddenly got a much better deal. That said, my understanding is that show has sold out pretty much since it opened.
Oh, I'm
and I
sure.
don't see that slowing down in a hurry, because people either want to find out what's so offensive or want to go precisely because they know they're going to enjoy it.
Do you know, I've got 2 stories on Book of Mormon.
Mm.
The first is that I have no interest in seeing it. And it's not because I'm worried about religious sensibilities or anything like that. It's just I have no interest in seeing.
Fair enough.
And I enjoyed South Park when it was. I mean, it's still going, I believe, but it's it's had its day. People don't talk about it anymore.
No, as
then-
things do.
But and I've seen other musicals by this team. I saw Cannibal, which was appalling.
I haven't seen that yet.
Oh well, let that yet long continue.
Fair enough.
So, but so I got a rough idea of what the tone and feel and style of it would be, and that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't fancy it. I simply don't fancy it. There's nothing about it I'm interested in. And so I haven't seen it, and I have no intention of seeing it. They
Fair
could
enough.
offer me a ticket free of charge, and I probably wouldn't go. That's my attitude on it, and I don't know why it doesn't speak to me at all. I can't actually work out what it is that simply doesn't say I want to see this. It doesn't happen to me very often.
One of those things, I guess. It's enough. Sometimes, I mean, I've seen things that everybody raves about. Okay, maybe not so much in theatre, but to give an example, I saw Fight Club, the film. And I came out of that and went, it's 2.5 hours of my life I'm not getting back. And that's one of these cult things that everybody's
Yeah.
supposed to love. And it just went, well, it didn't even go over my head. I got it, and I wondered what the fuss was about.
So what happens in Fight Club should stay in Fight Club because it's boring.
Yeah, basically.
no one's
to me,
interested.
at any rate. And I felt like it was, the twist was so foreshadowed that...
Yeah.
Whatever. That's a different topic. But I feel like there is that thing of sometimes something just doesn't take you.
Yep.
Unfortunately, I didn't learn my lesson and work that one out before I watched the film. But
Yeah.
if it's not going to take you, it's not going to take you.
Well, sometimes you've got to take a risk and try things out.
Absolutely.
I mean, forgive me, both From Here to Eternity and Stephen Ward were punts because they were closing, and I thought they were the kind of shows I ought to see.
Yeah.
As it happens, I really enjoyed one and really didn't enjoy the other, but I'm glad I saw them both.
Yeah, likewise.
But this show I've got no interest in at all.
Fair enough.
Same with Matilda. I'm not interested in Matilda, not interested in this show, and I don't quite know why, but there we are.
Well, I love both.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say, actually, is if people aren't sure about this and they don't know the score yet, I would say have a listen to the cast recording, because one thing that you will, for sure, I think, is people who love the big band sound of musical theatre. This really brings that back in a big way. So if you like something like Wicked because the score is big and in your face, Book of Mormon is absolutely something you should check out.
And the other story I've got about it, of course, is that people are drawing different things from it. I have a friend who's actually quite a devout Catholic, and he went to see it, and he came back, and his only comment, well, he really enjoyed it, but his comment to me was that, they really sock it to the Mormons. Not realising, I think, that it's not that Mormonism is being used, I think, as an avatar, if you like, for all religion, certainly Christian religions. So he didn't see it at all as an attack on his faith,
right,
or his God, as it were.
I suppose,
and I thought that's very interesting because it's been made very plain to me by someone who's by Tim Saywood, and Tim won't mind me saying he's an avowed atheist, and he sees it as an attack on religion. So it's interesting to me that different people from different stances on that viewpoint have got different things out of it, and presumably is one of the central characters. Can I ask, because I'm not going to see it, but are any of the Mormons sort of redeemed, as it were? Because they're supposed to be sort of crass, culturally inept visitors, are they not?
Well, spoiler alert. Redemption comes in very odd forms. So the one who I suppose gets the most out of it in the sense that he ends the show being revered is Elder Cunningham, who is the loud, I suppose, Cartman-like
the
character.
Uncouth one, yes,
who basically spends his entire time making stuff up. Gets berated by God at one point, if I remember correctly, but certainly gets shouted at by his dad in visions and things like this of the fact that he's making things up. I think Yoda comes out and has a go in the Hobbits. It gets very surreal. But he, at the end of it, he has used the way that he has twisted the religion to achieve the goal he was trying to do, which is actually to stop the, I don't know the correct term for it, to stop the medical castration of, or the non-medical castration, I suppose, of the female population of Uganda, which is what the sort of
female genital mutilation.
Yes,
which of course is a big political issue.
Which
at
is
the
a big
moment,
yes,
so, yeah.
And again, that will punch you in the face if you're not expecting it. It's a big focus of the show, and
so it's using religion, and I do mean exploiting religion, for political ends in the end, actually.
In many ways.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's interesting, I've been thinking while I've been talking, what do I see it as an attack on? And actually, I think I'd agree that, I'm not sure attack is the right word even, but I think it's certainly... No, attack is the right word. It does attack religion, yes. I think it's absolutely... they've chosen the Mormons, but I think you've used the right word. The Mormons are an avatar. They're used because I think...
Yes.
I suppose.
Why not?
Well, yeah. Sadly, they
have a big missionary zeal, which helps in this context.
Well, and I think the big thing is that that people find it easier to poke fun at people who have done something to them first, and because Mormonism is such an evangelistic pursuit, that it's. To people who want to attack a religion, it's like painting a target on their heads because they've put themselves out there. Yeah, absolutely. And so I suppose, yes, it is. But the thing is that whilst I feel like it's an attack, I feel that you can be religious, you can go and see this and not actually be insulted. I don't know what a Mormon would think.
Now, it's called Book of Mormon.
Yes.
But it's a religious text rather than a literary text. That's how it's always understood. But
Absolutely.
You did see a musical that related to not just one, but a whole series of literary texts.
I did
by
indeed.
a great British writer.
And this I wasn't expect. I had no idea quite what to expect going into this. This would be Dickens Abridged, which was put on at the Arts Theatre back in January. And this is by Adam Long, who is one of the original... I think he's one of the originals anyway. I'm sure he's one of the originals of the Reduced Shakespeare Company.
It has that resonance.
Well, Dickens Abridged, yes. To anybody who knows the complete works of Shakespeare abridged or the complete history of America abridged, etc., that name will ring a bell, and it rings a bell for good reason. But it wasn't the whole team that wrote this. It was Adam Long and a couple of other people, I think. Now, he's obviously expanding his borders a little bit. He also... now, I don't know the full thing about this, but it was certainly a very early... concept show. He also did a show at Jermyn Street called Satan Sings Mostly Sondheim, where it was the devil wanting to sing Sondheim. And
that's interesting, because the devil's supposed to have all the best tunes, and I think that finally proves it.
Well, absolutely.
You can't whistle a Sondheim, so now you can.
Except that show, I mean, with the greatest respect to them, it was a very early draft of something, and I think it had a lot of scope to be interesting, but it was clearly more the demonstration of an idea than it was the production of a show. Dickens Abridged, on the other hand, was amazingly slick. To anyone who's seen any of the abridged shows will probably know what to expect. And it had all the slickness of that, but with music. And I totally wasn't expecting that going in, and it was a full musical. And they do all of the hamming and poking fun at the works of Dickens
canon,
that they have
yes.
done of others, but with song. And some of the music in this was absolutely hilarious.
The music or the lyrics, or both?
Both.
Oh, right, so they were able to
Absolutely
make comic
both.
songs.
They made very, very comic songs out of it. They also had all the music played on stage by the actors. But all the instrumentation was done on stage. It was all done in silly costumes. It was all done in ridiculous modes and styles. And it just, with the lyric writing, which is superlative, it just made for an absolutely hilarious show. And to anyone that knows Dickens, you could pick out so many little elements that they'd slipped in. It was a very well researched show.
Now, we've had reason to remark on Musical Talk on many occasions that Dickens's tomb has been plundered for many a musical.
Goodness,
and
yes.
continues to be plundered for such. But I suppose the question is, did the score in this in any way parody or pay at least musical lip service to any of the best known songs from Oliver, Pickwick, you name it, you name them, they've been musicalised?
There may have been a very, very quick reference to As Long As He Needs Me. As in, I think that's as much as got sung.
So they really, in truth, the songs relate back to the hardcore canon of Dickens rather than other adaptations of Dickens.
Oh, absolutely. I should add at this point that I have not seen, heard, etc. by any means all of the Dickens work that's out there in terms of...
I don't think you could.
Well, no, for a start, but even the big ones, I
Yeah.
think a lot of, of course I've seen Oliver. I think it's difficult to miss that. And I've seen a couple of productions of this, that and the other, but he produced so much work, it's impossible to have seen it all. I've only read a couple of them. And so I don't know what was necessarily harking to which production, but most of it was harking back. There's things like Parliamentary Sketches by Boz,
Yes.
which is used for a very, very comical scene, and that's not really even known
No.
a lot of the time these days. And then, of course, they use, as I say, they do quote Oliver with As Long As He Needs Me. I think that was the only quote, and as I say, those were the only words that were actually sung from it, and the rest of it was all... But they use recognisable quotes. So at the end of The Tale of Two Cities, there's the quote, "There's a far, far better thing I do than I've ever done before," which was actually one of the standout moments of the show, just because of the way that they actually staged it. Spoiler alert, I suppose, in case this show comes back at some point in time, but John Robbins' character is singing this as he goes to the guillotine, and he gets as far as "It's a far, far better thing I do," and the guillotine takes his head off.
Oh, right.
And the executioner reaches into the basket, pulls the head out, and it keeps on singing.
Oh, does it? That's
And
good.
then
Yeah.
he gets this wicked, like, Cheshire Cat grin, and the executioner pulls a harmonica out of his other pocket and holds it there and, sort of moves it around so that he can play it as this decapitated head that the executioner's still holding. And it was just everybody was falling off their seats laughing. And that kind of sets the tone for the show, really. The whole thing was like that. And anyone who's seen an abridged show knows exactly what to expect.
But it is a series of sketches, isn't it?
Yes,
So
absolutely.
You couldn't argue there was a linking narrative.
There is the overarching thing of it's almost like a This Is Your Life.
Yes.
This is Dickens' story. Dickens actually appears as a character at one point at the
does
beginning
he?
of the show, possibly at the end as well, I forget now. This was literally sort of 5th of January last year, so it's a while since I've seen it. But there's a lot of lip service to the characters, but there is also that sense of we're pushing this forward, and even while we're sort of mocking these characters, they relate it a little bit back to his life. There's a scene where he's sort of talking about how he wants to keep on writing, and he suddenly comes up with I can't remember which title, but he suddenly brings to mind one of the titles of the books. So there is a narrative element to it, much as I suppose it's a bit more chronological than Shakespeare, in the sense of I feel like Shakespeare, it's just like, let's do this bit, and let's do all the histories as a football game, and that sort of thing. So it's all out of order, whereas this is very much, you sort of have placards that show what the... like a boxing ring girl walking across, showing
Drood,
what the show
presumably.
is.
Yeah.
Oh, good lord, Drood. I can't remember the Drood bit. There must have been one.
I thought it'd be at the end if it was going to be anywhere. So.
One would assume so. I honestly don't remember. There may not have been. Was there one? Oh goodness, I should know that
Well,
because I loved it.
incomplete, so.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. But yeah, they had these sort of, they showed you what it was. They also sometimes talk, I think when they're doing their little spiels between, they talk about the year that a story was written or some such. And it's all done in many ways to give the actors time to change to get ready for the next part as well. So anyone that's familiar with Abridged will also know how little time the actors actually ever spend off stage. I know when I did Shakespeare Abridged, I think the longest time I was off stage was 47 seconds. And it's all manic. And so they need those moments of time to change and get ready. And so they used that, they framed it with this is what happened in Dickens's life at this point. And that's actually where all the Parliamentary Sketches stuff comes in. You see him working in the bootblacking factory, which is how he started, which again actually has one of the best songs coming out of it, where he sort of goes country, singing about how he's not going to be blacking boots forever. It's wonderful. But I just, this has been, bearing in mind, as I say, this was about the 5th of January or 20th of January or something like that. It's right at the beginning of 2014. And it's one of the shows I was still talking about at the end of the year.
Jolly good.
The whole way through. It's just so funny. And every now and then I see somebody who I know likes Dickens. It's like, oh, there's this show. You must keep an eye out in case it comes back. And seriously, people, if this show ever reappears anywhere, just go and see it. I really hope it does. I think it had about a month run or something like that. But it really... I saw it right at the end, and I just wished I could have gone back, and I couldn't. But more people need to see this show. It's fantastic.
There ain't nobody here but Charles Dickens.
I believe that joke was actually made in the show.
It's an old joke.
It is an old joke, yes. But yes, that's... I think, yeah, that probably covers my standout list. There are other shows that I saw.
Of course.
But in my moment of sitting here without, as I mentioned in the previous episode, I lost my list when my Mac died, and those are the ones that are sort of standing out to me.
These are your standout shows then, that's fine.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, I saw a couple. I tell you one thing I would like to mention, which is just a quick nod, really, which was No Way to Treat a Lady, which is a show that I saw at the Landor. And I went to that largely because Nick Chave, my writing partner, was the MD on it.
Oh, jolly.
And actually, I got a really, really great show out of that. And we were talking about period pieces, and here's another one that's set a little way back. And it's another of these I'm planning a murder shows.
Oh, right.
And it was absolutely fantastic from beginning to end, this whole stalker relationship that's carried through with some brilliant performances from this old woman, and the guy's basically the son that can never make the mother proud of this prima donna, very successful actress mother. So rather than doing anything else, he decides to take on these roles to kill all these elder women who are played by the same older actress who plays the mother. So it's one of these multiple role things.
Coronets and Kind Hearts and Coronets, which
not in the same way as A Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder, but I think you could...
No, but it's backwards, isn't it? Gender, it's the reverse gender.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, no,
it's the woman playing all the characters who are supposed to be...
Yes, except it's, in both cases it's a man that does all the killing. I don't know about Kind Hearts and Coronets, but in Gentleman's Guide at any rate.
It is, yeah.
But it's certainly a similar feel. This is a different story. It's not quite the same thing, and he's just killing because he wants to make the mother proud. There's nothing to do with any ambition beyond that.
Faintly amusing.
The tone's hilarious. There's this massive, this wonderful sort of tango scene where he comes in disguised as this enormously sexy Spanish dancer, and they're dancing around, and every time he thinks he's about to push her out the window, she drags him back on by the feather boa and things like this. It's a brilliant
choreography again.
Very good choreography. So if you do happen to see this show coming anywhere near you, I do recommend seeing it because it's a great laugh, and I really, really enjoyed it.
Well, David, thank you very much for giving us your memories of London, as it were.
My very pleasure.
And I do hope that we'll get to speak and hear from you again in the future. But until then,
I sincerely hope so.
I hope you enjoy the theatre in whichever continent you find yourself plopped.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, sir.
Musical talk. Well, there we are, David Kingsmill in conversation about some of the shows that he has identified as his sort of pick of the West End in the last few years. I hope that we'll be able to get to speak to David again soon to talk about some more shows that he will have seen more recently, presumably in Canada and in America, which is where he's currently living. What a globe-trotting fellow he is. Unlike the old stick-in-the-mud me. And to prove what a stick-in-the-mud I am, I'm going to go straight to my traditional ending for all these episodes and say, the word you've been longing to hear, goodbye. And I'm going to do it now. Goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk, presented by Thos Ribbits and David Kingsmill, and edited by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2016. To find out more about the world of musical talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our brand new website, musicaltalkpodcast.weebly.com, or subscribe to us on iTunes, and follow us on Facebook and on Twitter. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can, at musicaltalkthos.
But it is a series of sketches, isn't it?
Yes,
So
absolutely.
You couldn't argue there was a linking narrative, except in terms of paying homage
There's
to
a
Dickens in a funny
Good
way.
evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Olivier Theatre. Would you please
Humpty
take
Dumpty
your seats as this evening's performance of Behind the Beautiful Forevers will begin in 5 minutes. May I remind you that taking of photographs is not permitted during the performance, and to please ensure that all mobile phones are completely switched off. Thank you.
A lot of blow on that mic.
Yeah, right.